At exactly 10 o'clock, someone knocked on my front door with the same desperate rhythm my ex-wife used the day she told me our daughter had stopped breathing. I had not heard that knock in 3 years, yet my body remembered it before my mind did. My coffee mug slipped from my hand and shattered across the kitchen floor as I ran through the darkened hallway, certain that whatever waited outside would tear open every wound I had spent years trying to bury. When I pulled the door open, I found my ex-wife's best friend, Claire Whitmore, standing beneath the porch light with rainwater dripping from her hair, a sealed envelope clutched against her chest, and tears in her eyes. Before I explain why Claire had come, and how the truth she carried changed the lives of everyone involved, please like, comment, share, and subscribe to our channel if you believe in kindness, forgiveness, hope, and second chances, because sometimes the person who breaks your heart is not the person you thought they were, and sometimes healing begins with a truth that arrives far too late. Claire looked thinner than I remembered, and the confidence she had always worn so naturally seemed to have vanished. She had once been inseparable from my ex-wife, Natalie, the kind of friend who knew where the spare keys were kept, remembered every birthday, and walked into our home without knocking. After the divorce, however, she disappeared from my life as completely as Natalie had. I assumed she had chosen her side, and I never blamed her for it. Most people believe divorce creates two versions of the same marriage, but ours had created dozens. Natalie told her family I had become cold and controlling. I told no one anything. Silence felt more dignified than defending myself, even when friends stopped calling and neighbors looked at me with guarded sympathy. Claire stood on my porch that night as though she had been carrying the weight of every false story, and when she finally stepped inside, she placed the envelope on my table and told me Natalie had suffered a serious medical emergency earlier that evening. She was alive, but unconscious, and before the ambulance arrived she had begged Claire to bring me what was inside the envelope. The night itself lasted only a few minutes in my memory, a brief and essential interruption before the story returned to daylight. Claire explained that Natalie had collapsed at her apartment shortly after dinner and had been taken to St. Matthew's Medical Center. Doctors suspected a ruptured cerebral aneurysm, and surgery had begun less than an hour earlier. Natalie's parents were driving in from another state, and Claire had been told to wait, but instead she had come directly to me. She said the envelope contained something Natalie had written months before, though she had never found the courage to deliver it. My first instinct was anger. Natalie had been gone from my life for 3 years. She had sold our home while I was still searching for an apartment, blocked my number, and made it nearly impossible for me to see our daughter, Hazel, without lawyers involved. Hazel was now 8 years old enough to recognize tension but too young to understand why her parents could barely stand in the same room. I told myself Natalie's condition was no longer my responsibility, yet the moment Claire mentioned Hazel, all my defenses collapsed. The following morning, sunlight poured through the hospital windows with almost insulting brightness. Claire and I sat across from each other in the surgical waiting area, surrounded by vending machines, pale walls, and families whispering prayers into trembling hands. Hazel was staying with Natalie's neighbor until her grandparents arrived. I had wanted to bring her to me immediately, but Claire warned me that Hazel had been told her mother was undergoing a procedure and needed rest. The doctors had successfully stopped the bleeding, but Natalie remained in critical condition, and no one knew whether she would wake without permanent damage. I held the unopened envelope in my lap for nearly an hour. Part of me feared it contained another accusation or legal demand. Another part feared it held an apology powerful enough to make me question everything I had survived. Claire watched me carefully, then admitted that she already knew most of what Natalie had written. That confession stirred something darker than curiosity. I asked why she had waited until now, and the guilt on her face answered before her words did. Claire told me that the end of my marriage had begun with a lie she helped create. 3 years earlier, Natalie had discovered she was pregnant. The news should have been joyful, but during an early appointment she learned the pregnancy was medically complicated. Doctors warned that continuing it could threaten her life and that the baby might not survive. Natalie had always been terrified of illness because her younger brother died from a heart condition when they were teenagers. Instead of telling me, she panicked. She believed I would insist on saving the pregnancy at any cost because I had once spoken about wanting another child. Claire urged her to trust me, but Natalie became convinced that if I knew, I would sacrifice everything, including her safety, for the possibility of expanding our family. The fear distorted her judgment. She ended the pregnancy without telling me, then drowned in grief and shame. When I noticed her withdrawal and asked what was wrong, she mistook my concern for pressure. Rather than admit what had happened, she began constructing a version of our marriage in which I was the reason she felt trapped. The revelation struck me with such force that I could barely breathe. During the months before our separation, Natalie had accused me of monitoring her, criticizing her choices, and trying to control her friendships. I remembered apologizing repeatedly without understanding what I had done. I changed how I spoke, gave her more space, canceled work trips, and arranged counseling. Nothing helped. She became colder each week until she finally filed for divorce. Claire admitted that she had supported Natalie publicly because she believed her friend was emotionally fragile and feared that exposing the truth would push her towards self-harm. She also admitted that silence had become easier with time. By the time she realized the damage, lawyers were involved, families were divided, and Natalie had repeated the story so often that confessing seemed impossible. I wanted to hate Claire. I wanted to stand up and leave her alone with her guilt, but I saw something painfully familiar in her expression. She had spent years punishing herself just as I had spent years questioning myself. When Natalie's parents arrived that afternoon, the waiting room grew tense. Her father, Graham, had not spoken to me since the divorce. Her mother, Elise, once treated me like a son, but now greeted me with a guarded nod. They had believed Natalie's version of events completely. Claire asked them to sit down, then told them the truth. Graham's face hardened at first, not against Natalie but against Claire and me, as though the story itself were an attack on his daughter while she lay unconscious. Elise began crying before Claire finished. She remembered Natalie's secret medical appointments and the sudden period of exhaustion she had blamed on stress. She also remembered how Natalie had refused therapy after the divorce, insisting that distance from me was all she needed. The truth rearranged every memory in the room. No one became innocent, and no one became entirely guilty. We were simply people who had reacted to fear with pride, loyalty, silence, and self-protection until those reactions hardened into years of pain. Hazel arrived the next morning with Elise. The hospital corridors were filled with daylight, and she looked impossibly small beneath the weight of her backpack. When she saw me, she ran into my arms without hesitation. I had not held her for more than a few minutes at a time in months because Natalie had recently restricted visits after accusing me of confusing her. Hazel pressed her face against my shoulder and asked whether her mother was going to die. I told her the doctors were helping Natalie and that none of us would leave her alone. In that moment, I realized the truth in the envelope mattered less than the child trembling in my arms. Whatever anger I carried toward Natalie could not become Hazel's inheritance. She deserved parents who did not use pain as a weapon. She deserved to love us both without feeling disloyal to either. I promised myself that even if Natalie never woke, would speak of her with compassion. Not because the lies were acceptable, but because Hazel's heart should not become the final casualty of our marriage. Later that day, I finally opened the envelope. Natalie's handwriting covered 12 pages. She began by admitting the pregnancy, the procedure, and the fear that had consumed her. She described waking from anesthesia and feeling as though she had betrayed everyone, including a child who would never know daylight. She wrote that when I tried to comfort her without understanding the reason for her grief, she felt unworthy of my kindness. Instead of confessing, she turned my love into evidence against me. She convinced herself I had pressured her to become a mother again, even though I had never demanded it. She admitted exaggerating arguments, misleading her attorney, and allowing her parents to believe I had frightened her. Every lie created a temporary shelter from shame, but each shelter required another lie to keep it standing. By the time the divorce was final, she no longer knew how to return to the truth without losing everyone's respect. The final pages were not a request to reunite. Natalie wrote that she did not expect forgiveness and had no right to ask for it. She said she had started therapy 6 months earlier after Hazel asked why her father always looked sad. That question pierced the story Natalie had created. She began recording memories honestly and realized how thoroughly she had rewritten our marriage to avoid facing herself. She planned to give me the letter after an upcoming custody review, but fear stopped her each time. She had also instructed her attorney to restore shared custody and prepare a written statement correcting the allegations she had made. At the bottom of the last page, she wrote that I had been a good husband during a terrible season and that losing me was not the punishment she feared most. The punishment was watching Hazel grow up inside a lie. Natalie woke 2 days later beneath the soft light of late morning. Her recovery was uncertain, and her speech was weak, but she recognized her parents, Claire and Hazel. When I entered the room, her eyes filled with panic. She tried to turn away, but she lacked the strength. I stood beside the bed carrying every emotion I had felt over 3 years: humiliation, grief, anger, love, and the aching desire to be seen accurately by the person who had known me best. I told her I had read the letter. She closed her eyes as tears slipped down her temples. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. The silence was different from the silence that had ended our marriage. That old silence had been built from avoidance. This one held truth, painful and exposed, but finally real, that I did not tell Natalie that everything was forgiven. Forgiveness spoken too quickly can become another form of dishonesty. I told her the damage was real, that years with Hazel had been taken from me, and that my reputation among people I loved had been destroyed. I told her Claire's silence had also caused harm, even if it came from fear and loyalty. Then I told her that I did not want the rest of our lives to be shaped by the worst choices we had made. I would not return to the marriage we once had, because that marriage was gone. But I was willing to build a healthier relationship as Hazel's father, and I was willing to let Natalie earn trust slowly through actions rather than promises. Her hand moved across the blanket until her fingers touched mine. I did not hold them tightly, but I did not pull away. Recovery took months, all of them unfolding beneath hospital lights, rehabilitation center windows, and bright afternoons at home. Natalie struggled with balance, headaches, and occasional memory gaps. Claire attended nearly every therapy session, not as a heroic friend but as a woman accepting responsibility for the pain her silence had caused. She apologized to me without demanding that I comfort her. Graham visited my apartment one afternoon and admitted he had judged me without asking a single question. Elise gave me a box of photographs Natalie had kept after the divorce, including pictures of Hazel's school events I had been prevented from attending. Each apology mattered, but none erased the past. Healing did not arrive as a dramatic moment. It came through consistent, ordinary choices: returning phone calls, sharing medical updates, correcting false stories, and allowing Hazel to see both parents sitting in the same sunny room without hostility. Natalie eventually made a formal statement acknowledging that the allegations against me had been distorted by her untreated grief and fear. Some friendships returned. Others did not. I learned that vindication is rarely as satisfying as people imagine. Being proven right did not restore the birthdays, school plays, and quiet evenings I had missed with Hazel. What restored me was the future opening again. Shared custody was reinstated, and Hazel began spending equal time with both of us. On her first full weekend at my apartment, she placed a drawing on the refrigerator. It showed 3 houses beneath one enormous yellow sun. In the first house stood Natalie. In the second stood me. In the third stood Claire and Hazel's grandparents. A path connected every door. When I asked why the sun was so large, Hazel explained that everyone could still stand in the same daylight even if they did not live under the same roof. That drawing changed the way I understood forgiveness. I had always imagined forgiveness as reopening a door to the past, but Hazel showed me it could be a path towards something entirely new. Natalie and I did not remarry. We did not pretend that love alone could repair what dishonesty had destroyed. Instead, we became honest co-parents and, over time, careful friends. She learned to speak about shame before it became anger. I learned that protecting my dignity did not require emotional isolation. Claire rebuilt her friendship with both of us, though she accepted that trust would never again be automatic. Her late arrival at my door had not magically saved anyone. What changed everything was what followed: confession, accountability, patience, and the decision to stop using fear as an excuse for silence. A year after the surgery, we gathered for Hazel's school picnic on a clear Saturday afternoon. Natalie walked slowly across the grass with a cane, while Claire carried a basket of food beside her. Graham and Elise arranged folding chairs beneath a maple tree. I watched Hazel race toward us with a ribbon from a school competition pinned to her shirt. For the first time in years, she did not hesitate or glance between her parents before choosing where to run. She threw one arm around Natalie and the other around me, pulling us together with the effortless certainty of a child who finally believed love did not require choosing sides. Natalie looked at me over Hazel's shoulder, and the gratitude in her eyes held no request for more than the moment itself. Before this story ends, leave a meaningful comment about whether forgiveness should be given immediately, or whether true forgiveness must be earned through honesty and changed behavior. Your words may help someone who is struggling to decide whether healing means returning to the past or building a better future. If this story touched your heart, please like this video, leave a meaningful comment, share it with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to our channel so you never miss another emotional journey. The deepest lesson I learned was that truth arriving late still has the power to save what remains, but only when it is followed by courage. Natalie could not return the years she had taken from me. Claire could not undo her silence. I could not erase the bitterness that had once consumed me. Yet together, we stopped passing that pain forward. Sometimes second chances do not restore the life you lost. Sometimes they give you the wisdom to create a life more honest than the one you had before. And when Hazel stood between us beneath that enormous afternoon sun, smiling without fear, I understood that everything truly had changed.